How did Burt transition? I mean, he made The Killers, that made him an instant star, and then he went on to Brute Force and the other. It seemed like he had a plan from the very beginning with Harold Hecht that, you know, I'm going to go to Hollywood and I am going to be in charge of my own destiny. And talk a little bit about that, and then his transition from the film noir movies into the other things that you had mentioned.
Yeah, it's a remarkable career. In fact, when Atlantic City came out, all the critics fell all over themselves in '81 to say this remarkable but little remarked upon career. I mean, he starts in The Killers, and Hecht had said, as I said, he had one outside option, but Hecht also said, you sign with me and not some other agent, and we will be making our own pictures in a few years. And Burt listened. He was 33 years old in this movie, or 34.
32.
32? Okay. And he'd already burned himself out in the circus. I mean, that was finished. He couldn't continue with that. It was after the war. He had a chance here to capitalize on something, and he hit the ground running. And almost immediately, he had the Hellinger contract, he had the Paramount contract. He then forms Norma Productions, named for his second wife, the mother of his 5 children, his own independent production company. Now, everybody after the war, particularly after the Paramount antitrust decision, which broke up the vertical integration of the movie industry, it burst the whole industry apart, and so it was like the Wild West, and everybody wanted to have their own production company. But very few actors had the discipline and the intelligence to go and learn how movies were made. And Burt literally made a pest of himself. He would go and hang out with the costume department, with the sound department, with the producers. He set himself out to learn how movies were made. So he has 3 contracts here, Hellinger, Norma, his own company, and Paramount. He then signs a Warner Brothers contract in the early 50s. And as Hedda Hopper said, he sliced more ways than a watermelon. He then, in a very important contract in 1953, United Artists was almost moribund. And 2 New York lawyers decided to revive it. And they decided they needed one star on whose back they could revive United Artists, this company that was formed in the teens by Pickford, Chaplin, Griffith, and Fairbanks.
Right.
And so they launched United Artists on the back of Burt Lancaster. So he became the most successful star-driven independent production company in 50s Hollywood. In fact, Neil Gabler said to me, he said, you track the course of Lancaster's career in 50s Hollywood and you track 50s Hollywood. It was this remarkable decade between the domination of the so-called golden age of studio domination and the brave new world of independent production. And Lancaster's company, which ultimately becomes Hecht-Hill-Lancaster, HHL, really set the town on fire for that decade.
Yeah.
Not always with the most successful films, but often extremely successful, and remade United Artists. And people had forgotten that.
Yeah. The Mickey Knox story that I was going to tell that I segued into something else was that Mickey told me that Burt told him when he came for the interview with Hellinger, that Hellinger was in some sort of meeting and kept him waiting and waiting and waiting, and Burt started pacing. As Elmer Bernstein once told me back, he said, Lancaster moved like a puma, like in a pacing, pacing, and he was pacing, and then he said, screw this, I'm going to go back to New York, I don't have time for this Hollywood bullshit, and he was actually leaving Hellinger's office at Universal, and Hellinger came out and ran after him and brought him back and set him down. So, but for a few moments, who knows what would have happened to
he had remarkable confidence. I mean, he really, in a way, he felt he had everything to gain and nothing to lose. And that Hollywood was one big circus. He called it that. It was one big circus. And so he could play it like a circus. Yeah. If you fall and goof, like in films like he made, like The Rose Tattoo, that he got crucified for by the critics, he didn't care. Yeah. He learned, and he would bounce back and try the next thing. It was
the other thing I loved about him is that in talking with some of his contemporaries like Julie Dassin, and corresponding with him, is that Julie Dassin at one point when he was making Brute Force with Burt, and he went into this long, you need to summon up your character, and this guy's plotting against you, so you need to do this and give him this look, and goes into this long, detailed directorial explanation on what Burt needed to do, and Burt says, oh, You mean you just want me to give him the old snake eye, huh? He broke it down and made it real simple. Susie, one thing I want to ask is Burt directed one movie, I think it was 1955, The Kentuckian. Did he ever express to you the desire to direct, or was he already directing, because if it was a Burt Lancaster movie, it was his movie anyway, regardless of the director? How did you feel about that?
He said he'd never do it again. It was just too much to act and direct.
Okay.
You can only give so much to yourself, and you can only be in so many places at once, and it was very, very difficult for him. Very difficult. He didn't do it again.
Well, he did The Midnight Man, but that was not much fun either.
And that,
Yeah.
no.
Much later, and not very good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing you alluded to, Kate, is his ability to, he really tried to stretch himself as an actor. He did not, he could have stayed with what he was good at and what he was comfortable at, but come back Little Sheba. Playing roles like that Birdman of Alcatraz, Judgment at Nuremberg, he really tried to stretch himself, did he not?
Well, what's really interesting too, as at the same time that he's forming this remarkable independent production company and hiring some of the smartest, best writers and actors in town and trying to really make, again, movies that spoke to his time, he was also reinventing and breaking the star mold. As you said, he didn't, as Tony Curtis said to me, he'd never make Rocky II. Ever. He never repeated From Here to Eternity. He would play on that later in something like Go Tell the Spartans, much, much later. He'll take that military motif and bury it. But he never wanted to repeat himself. And so he deliberately, at the cost of ridicule by the critics, with Come Back Little Sheba, Rose Tattoo, just to name two, he would take on very ambitious character parts that a huge star like him just didn't do, by and large, in the 50s. But he didn't care. He wanted to try something new. If it didn't work, he'd try the next thing. He had a core restlessness in addition to a huge intelligence. And he really loved challenges. Part of it was the athlete in him, too. He had some comment once that you take the hunger out of you, the hunger to win, and you're no longer a champion. So you have to push and push and push. That kind of edge and constantly changing himself was what defined him.
You're absolutely right. I can just hear those words coming out of his mind, his mouth, and the fact that he never wanted to do a sequel. He just wouldn't even think of it.
You told me a story the other night about that I thought was very revealing about his character, about when someone was making a pass at you. And tell that story. I think it's very revealing.
We were up at the AT&T golf tournament. Burt was playing in the golf. And in the tournament, I was driving in the cart, and there were a lot of celebrities there, and pros, of course. And one particular gentleman, whose name I won't mention because you'd all know who it is.
Go ahead.
Dish,
No way.
Susie. This is we're among friends here.
He wasn't married, anyway. But he kept coming on to me. And when we went back to the room, I said to Burt, gee, that's embarrassing. I'm really embarrassed. Why does he do that? And I'm going to ask the gentleman in the audience here to think about that and ask yourselves, what would you have said back to your lady friend? Were we married? No, we weren't married at the time. What would you have said back? Would you have said, I'll talk to him, or what? But what he said to me, and I thought it was so sweet and I never forgot it, is he half means it and he half doesn't. But whatever you do, don't put another guy down. And I thought that was really big of him.
No, it's don't humiliate him in public.
Yeah, don't. Other guys might get upset. But he just handled it so well, and he completely appeased me, and everything was good. The other story that I love, if I may tell, about John and...
Let it rip.
My son is now 45, but when he was in high school, a sophomore or junior, one of the teachers said, does anybody in the class know someone who will come and talk to us, somebody that would be known, an athlete, an actor, or someone famous? So John raises his hand and he said, well, I think I can get Burt Lancaster to come. And the teacher says, yeah, right, John, you get Burt Lancaster to come, I'll give you an A in the class. So he called Burt. Burt hung up and he says to me, "Oh, the things you do for love," you know. And he went and they didn't have it in the classroom, they had it in the auditorium, and the fire department would have been very upset because everybody was sitting in the aisles and standing around the wall and all the seats were taken, and there you go. Fast forward 20 years, my granddaughter is in school. Teacher asked the same question. Samantha raises her hand and says, "Well, my grandpa's Burt Lancaster." The teacher says, "Who's he?" And that is why when they have these festivals and get-togethers, I am so pleased because, like, Burt didn't want to be memorialized like Elvis Presley or Marilyn Monroe. He felt the films should stand on their own. I personally think he made a mistake. But it goes to show you, people forget, times change.
Yeah.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah.
But I thought that was very interesting.
How did you meet Burt? And how did your, a thumbnail, how did your relationship develop? But tell us how you met
Well,
Burt.
we were working on a TV film, and Steve Nicolaitis was the production manager who I'd worked for many times before. And he told me that I was to go to Mr. Lancaster's trailer every day and make sure he had coffee or whatever he needed, that, we got it for him. And as the time went on, they were moving furniture around and doing this and doing that, setting up for the next scene. And we were sitting on a sofa having this conversation. And apparently, the prop men asked us, get up, we got to move the sofa for the next scene. We didn't hear them. They must have asked again. Third time they picked up the sofa and moved the sofa with us on it. And that started, he invited me to the wrap party, and that sort of started it.
And it was all came from that.
Yeah, it all came from that.
All came from that.